Hello, everyone, and welcome to this first press conference today for Alexander Payne's The Holdovers. My name is Joe Utiki. I'm the Executive Awards Editor at Deadline, and I'm thrilled to be joined now by Professor Paul Hunnam himself, Mr. Paul Giamatti. Welcome, Paul.
Thank you very much. Pleasure to be here.
Now, the usual format applies. We'll talk to Paul about this exceptional film for the next half hour or so, and I'll put as many of your questions to him as I possibly can. I have the questions you pre-submitted to hand, but if you're eager to ask anything else, you can use the Q&A function in the chat at any time during the press conference to submit them. Just be sure to include your name and country so I can identify you. Now, Paul, 19 years ago, you played one of cinema's greatest misanthropic drunks in Sideways from Alexander Payne. Here he is now, nearly 2 decades later, with a new character for you. Uh, a little bit of a different flavor to Paul Hunnam, but tell me how he introduced this role to you and how long the project's been gestating for you both.
Well, I'm not sure how long he had it around for, probably for a while before it ever got to me in any way, shape, or form. Um, he basically said to me, I've been working on something I think you'll find interesting. It was inspired by a French movie from the 1930s called Merluce, which is basically a similar idea of a guy who has to look after a bunch of kids over Christmas break. And I thought, oh, that sounds kind of interesting. And he said he's got some physical oddities. And that was basically all he told me. And I was like, sounds kind of interesting. And then he sent me an early draft of it, fairly early. And it didn't change a huge amount from what he showed me right off the bat. And he said, I've really had you in mind for this. I think for a lot of reasons he did, because I had a background that matched some of what's going on in the movie. And that was basically it. And we tried to make it a couple of years in a row, but scheduling just never worked out. So we could never sort of land on starting it. So he would sort of say, do you think we could do it this year? And I'd go, no, because my TV schedule. And so that happened maybe two or three times, and finally we did it.
Right, right. Well, it's interesting. You mentioned your background there. Sonny Alexander from the CCA has a question. How do you think your upbringing influenced the way you approach this character?
I think it influenced it completely and quite a bit. I mean, in ways that I'm not even aware of, ways I'm conscious of, but in many ways I'm not even conscious of. It's funny. There were lots of teachers. I mean, my whole family's teachers. So that was a huge influence, and the way I feel about teaching and teachers and all of that. And then actually specific teachers from the school I went to and from people who worked with my parents and stuff like that. But it's funny, like for instance, the other day, I had a friend I went to high school with who wrote to me and said, oh, it was so great. You were clearly completely imitating the head librarian from our school. And I hadn't thought of that guy in decades. And I thought, oh my God, I really was. And I didn't even realize how much I was being the head librarian. Like exactly. And totally unconscious.
Yeah, that's fascinating. I mean,
Yeah.
was it mannerisms or like what specifically
Yeah,
did
I
you
think
pick
it
from?
was. It was something about, I mean, I think something of the way the character was written already was lending itself towards this guy. But there were definitely physical things that I was like, oh, I made myself look like that guy. And I didn't even think that I was looking like that guy. And he had an eye like that, which just it's coincidence that that was the case. But there was something about the way I carried myself and some of the way I was dressing, and just it was weird how the guy was right. I unconsciously been doing this guy.
Yeah, yeah. Well, not every film that you do enters the consciousness in quite the way that Sideways did 19 years ago. I feel like The Holdovers is going to be another one. Adnan Verk has a question about how would you describe your relationship with Alexander Payne?
Um, the best working relationship I've ever had. I'm friends with him too. I mean, we have a friendship that grew up over the years too. I mean, he's the best director I've ever worked with. I think he's the best director around. It's very fun and intimate and friendly. I mean, it's like we happen to be making a movie. We don't talk a lot about it. If an actor needs to talk a lot about stuff, he can do that, but we don't talk a lot about stuff. And it's
Yeah.
very simple things, simple direction, simple ideas. It's all very simple, and it's fun.
Well, Yuki Saru, I'm going to butcher this pronunciation, so I apologize in advance. Saru Watari from the CCA. Just curious, how was it to pick up with Alexander all these years later as a filmmaker? And do you think his filmmaking has evolved at all? I mean, he was pretty fully formed when you did Sideways.
I would agree. I think he's pretty fully formed. I mean, as a director with actors, he was the same, just better. I mean, it was like he was even more sort of at ease, and even why he likes actors, which is really great. And he loves actors and he likes connecting with them and stuff like that. The filmmaking of this movie was different by virtue of the kind of movie it was. The other movie I did with him, I mean, he said the other day I did a Q&A with him. Somebody asked him a technical question about cameras and stuff like that. And he said, every movie's different. I don't have a set way of doing something. And so Sideways was much more kind of loose and free form. There were multiple cameras going at a lot of the time. Everybody was mic'd. You could talk over each other. It was a bit more, this was by virtue of being a 70s movie, was a bit more formal. It was a bit
Right.
locked off and set, and like, and the sound was mono. Not everybody was mic'd. There were only one camera at a time. So it was different. And his pacing of this was different. It was very specific. He wanted a kind of faster pace and less sort of loose feeling.
Yeah. Well, Fred Topol has this incredible question. I love this question. When you think about being stuck over Christmas break with no internet or social media in the 1970s, does that seem like a blessing or a curse?
Blessing to me. It sounds fantastic to me. It sounds like heaven to me.
Yeah.
Great. Yeah, I would love it. I would have no problem with that.
Yeah.
I'd love nothing more than be snowed in. I love nothing more than a blizzard and a snowstorm that shuts everything down.
Yeah. You have kind of created here the ultimate Christmas movie, I feel. Terry Mulligan has a question about that. Christmas is a season of melancholy, reconnection, and loneliness, which I think is a real vision of his Christmas. What do you think Christmas added to the storyline?
Oh, I think it's a really important part of it personally. I think all the values of Christmas and all the sorts of ideals and ideas of Christmas, it's important that it's happening then, because it's the Scrooge story part of it. I mean, it's a little bit of Scrooge. All of them are a little bit of Scrooge, but the idea of sort of selflessness and redemption, rebirth, and things like that are important to the story, I think.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Sarah K. Adamson has a question about which scene did you enjoy filming the most? And she also asked, when you were working on the film, did you ever revert back to your days at Yale University?
I mean, sure, again, probably unconsciously, I did a lot. I mean, or days when I went to a prep school like that. Um, I enjoyed shooting everything. I think the thing I enjoyed the most was the whole day we shot around the skating rink and stuff like that, it was all a day at that place doing stuff. And I think it was the same day we shot the liquor store stuff. But I really enjoyed shooting the ice skating stuff. Just watching him ice skate was a thing in the script that I really liked, and was a thing that I really loved shooting. And no words or anything like that. It was just him beginning to see the kid in a different way and the kid beginning to see him in a different way. There's something really lovely about that scene.
I'm really curious to ask about this relationship that you have with Dominic, in the film. Tell me about your first meeting with him and the kind of the energy that he brought to set.
First time I met him was on Zoom. They had shown me his audition tape, and there was another kid they were considering, but this was the person they were leaning towards. And so they showed me him, and I thought he seemed amazing in so many ways. So I said, can I meet this guy? And so we did it on Zoom. And I was immediately, and I just loved him immediately. He's a really, really smart, lovely guy, and very soft-spoken, very intelligent, very emotionally engaged, just a lovely guy. And I thought there was nobody else that could play this part. I mean, in some ways, he sort of is the guy, and it was really lovely to watch him work.
I mean, was there an evolution for him? And this was his first role. I mean,
Yeah.
Tell me about
I mean,
that.
he was pretty steady on his legs already. I mean, it's like I do feel like yes, I could watch him relax more as the movie went on, and I
Right.
could watch him sort of enjoying and letting himself play with things more and just letting it breathe more. But I mean, everybody's like that when you start a movie. Everybody's nervous and needs to relax as the thing goes on. So it wasn't like he was that different. He comes already pretty professional and pretty ready to go, and he's really smart, and that's a huge bonus in working with him.
Mm. Michelle Manelis is curious, what kind of student were you? And did you have a mentor, like the character that you play in the film?
There was a teacher at that school. I wouldn't call him a mentor, but those schools are rough, and the teachers are rough. So he was one of the only teachers who wasn't like that. I don't know how I call him a mentor, but he was a nice guy. I was a if I was interested in the subject, I was good. If I wasn't interested, I didn't work very hard. But if I was interested, I was good. I was hopeless in math, and I still am. I still have nightmares about math class. Yeah, because I can't do anything. I have to count on my fingers, and even that's difficult for me.
That's
So
what agents are for, right? Hopefully.
that's right. That's what they do. They do all the math for me. Yeah.
Absolutely. Was there a teacher at all that changed your life? That's a question from Francesca Scorucci. I mean, anybody that kind of inspired your path, I suppose.
Well, there's people who inspired the role. I don't know if they changed my life, but there was definitely, I mean, as much as that librarian was in the thing unconsciously, I was consciously thinking of a teacher who I wouldn't say he changed my life, but he seemed very similar. First time I read the script, I thought of this biology teacher of mine in 10th grade. It was a very similar kind of guy. And I do think what was important in that was he was a difficult, sarcastic, not very nice guy.
Mm,
He was a good teacher, and I had flashes, even as a kid, of realizing he was actually a good guy. Alexander makes an interesting distinction between nice and kind, and this guy wasn't nice, but he was kind,
mm.
and that felt like the character.
Well, Paul is also an incredibly principled teacher. He expresses that very clearly in the film. Um, and Joe Fry's question kind of sort of summarizes what that gets him. Your character keeps getting the shaft. Yeah, he remains so reserved in the film. Did you ever feel like there was a time you wanted the character to kind of go off and lose his composure, really lose his rag with the way that he was
He
being
does
treated?
eventually. I mean, he loses it when he runs into that guy out in
Yeah.
and arguably he's in a bit of a state all the time. I mean, I tell that kid off at dinner too. I tell that horrible elitist racist kid off too. He loses his cool, but he gets it back fast. I mean, there is a definite sense of, he's a Roman historian, so stoicism is a big thing. Maintaining your cool, or at least appearing to maintain your cool, is very important for him all the time. I think he loses it several times in the movie, but gets it back very fast because that's the thing you have to maintain all the time.
Absolutely. Yeah. Marshall Schaffer says, do you see the holdovers as being in conversation with Sideways in terms of how it might reflect 2 decades of changed outlook for you and Alexander Payne? Whereas the things that might lead someone to become embittered as a younger man with more life experience, you give others grace.
It's interesting, the whole sort of relationship between the two movies. It's a funny subject that Alexander and I kind of tiptoed around without
Mm,
really ever directly addressing it. It's in some ways a better question for him, how much he was thinking of the other movie and how much it was, as you say, I mean, it's a similar guy 20 years on who is sort of changed in certain ways. There's a lot of similarities. There's a lot of dialogue between the two of them. It's very interesting.
mm,
Um, I can only say that I found this character different. I is a similar guy. I liked this character more. I think this guy's got more backbone and he's a little bit more, he's got more going on. He's tougher than the other guy. He's not self-pitying the way the other guy is. There's something I like about him more. Um, could the other guy have ended up this way? I don't know. I mean, it's different times. I think the other guy, a 20-year change could be different because there's psychotherapy and things like that. And there's antidepressants and things. Although my guy's on antidepressants back then, which was unusual in the holdovers. I mean, I don't know. It's a very interesting question how the two movies relate. I think they do in a lot of ways, but I would almost love to hear Alexander talk about it sometime.
They certainly seem to share a fondness for alcohol.
That's true. They both have drinking issues.
Mm.
I think in the 70s, I mean, so in theory does Mary too. I mean, so does Davine's character too, has a little bit of an issue with drinking too. And for different reasons. But yes, that's a definite feature of it. Yeah.
I think we had this conversation a while ago, and I'd love to see if you've reflected on it at all, which is that you have often played more often than most played glorious drunks. You seem to relish it. It seems to be something that you enjoy very
Uh-huh.
much, and I wonder where that comes from.
I don't know. Well, I mean, it's a fun thing to do. It's an interesting thing to play physically and emotionally, and it's everything about it is interesting. It's like, you're changed, and things change, and the physical aspect of it is fun. I don't know why I've done it so much because I've done it a lot. I did it on stage a lot. I would play when I did plays, I would frequently play the guy who drinks too much on stage. And I've done it in other movies too. It's not just Alexander's. I did a movie called Barney's Version where I play a really, I mean, worse than these two guys. A guy really blows his life apart by drinking too much. I don't know why it comes to me, but I definitely find it an interesting thing to play. It's fun in its perverse way to play it.
I just think you've become the expert on screen. I'm sure filmmakers haven't like given you these roles by observing you off screen. We would
No,
hope.
I don't. I can only say that I'm not a big drinker off screen. I'm not a huge drinker off screen. Not
Yeah.
that I haven't been inebriated in my life, so I have experience to draw on, but I'm not a big drinker. No.
Yeah. Well, you touched on Dave Vine's storyline there, and Adriano Ercolani has a question about what the most challenging scene to shoot was in an emotional way, and I wonder if it was some of those moments with that character because the study that she paints in grief is so beautiful in the film.
Mhm. Well, sure. I mean, that stuff with her, the scenes at that party were difficult to do, and she was great. And it's an interesting dynamic of what happens in that scene too. I mean, she falls apart. It's interesting that when they come out of that house, I'm pissed at the kid because I feel like he put us in a position where she and I let our guard down, and it
Mm.
didn't go well for either one of us. And it makes me, I take it out on him because it's like, but definitely those scenes are always when you're with somebody else who has to play that heavy kind of thing. It's always intense, but she was great and everybody was supportive of what was going on. Yeah, some of that stuff with her, yeah, probably it's where it gets into the more because they're both complicated people dealing with complicated senses of loss, different kinds. And so
Mm.
relationship between the two of them was, yeah, probably some of the more intricate stuff like that. Yeah.
I do wonder if it's part of the joy of the job though, is to reach the end of a day of shooting like that and feel like you really captured something that you really,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Totally. No, absolutely. When you do something like that, always, yeah. And you feel that you've really kind of did everything, you left everything on screen that you were supposed to. Yeah.
Yeah. Rafaela Gomez says that Paul can be seen as a very bitter and pedantic character, but you managed to make him not only likable, but also very relatable and charismatic. I think you touched on it earlier when you said you sort of feel that side of him more than you did with Miles and Sideways.
Yes.
What's the creative approach to doing that? She asks. Is that all in? Does that all come from the script, or is there work to be
A
done?
lot of it does, but it's also there's a sense. I mean, a lot of it does. A lot of it comes from though my experience with people like this, and there is a lot of charisma to these guys if they're good at what they do, and I think he is in some ways. I think in a lot of ways, two things. I actually think he's right a lot of times in what he's saying. He's just going about it the wrong way. So
Mm.
that's from a starting point. I was saying to myself, I like this guy. He's not wrong. And it's like, and he says, he's not wrong to want to take these elitist little jerks to task, racist too, a lot of them. You know what I mean? And it's like, and I feel sympathy for him. He's not of the same socioeconomic class either. He comes from what's probably a working class blue collar background. It's only very briefly alluded to, but it's like he's not from that world. Also, I think he's funny. And I think he knows he's funny, and I think he likes being funny. It's brutal the way he's being funny, but he's taking pleasure in it. And I remember saying to Alexander early on, this guy's a prick, but he enjoys being a prick. And I think that some of his hitting back at some of this stuff that's annoying maybe is relatable. I mean, a lot of people would like to tell these people to go F themselves, these kids, and stuff like that. So I think that there's certain pleasure taken in this guy not really caring about, he doesn't care about being liked either. He's okay with not being liked. And there's something kind of great about a person like that. I have a weird affection for somebody. And again, he's kind. Underneath it all, he's a good person who does care. I mean, he cares about the kid and he cares about teaching. And I think it breaks his heart in the end to say goodbye to this kid he's never going to see again. And it's like, I think he's a good person underneath it.
That's one of the things that I find so beautiful about the film is that there's a real journey there for each of these characters. I think it's become kind of popular in recent years to sort of imagine life as being this sort of thing that unfolds, and you don't really get that satisfying journey by the end of the film. And Sean Tajipur asks a question related to that, which is the storyline involves the characters discovering profound truths about themselves.
Mm-hmm.
And he wants to ask if you can discuss the character's personal growth and development throughout the film, that journey.
Yeah, no, it's interesting. I mean, I think it's interesting though, because there's real realizations, there's real connection, but the change isn't transformational. They're not all suddenly different people at the end, which is a
Right.
very hard thing to do. And that's Alexander's ability to kind of, it's still never, it isn't Scrooge. Everybody isn't suddenly a completely different person, but they're moving forward. They've helped each other move forward slightly. I do think to some extent, it's this story of a guy who's letting go of a lot of the shtick that he's gathered around himself, a lot of this persona he's gathered around himself to protect himself, to feel safe, to feel like he functions. It's the only place he feels like he functions well in the world. And he doesn't even function very well there. It's like nothing. He doesn't function very well anywhere, but he's got this elaborate facade that he's built up of this whole, the bow tie and the thing and the rectitude and the Rome and all this bullshit that's like incredibly elaborate around him. And it falls away. It starts to fall away through the movie, and he starts to let go of it to some extent. He puts it back on all the time, but he lets go of it, and it goes back on, and he lets go of it, and it's like, and I think that he begins to be able to make connections that he desperately, even more than he knows, he wants to make these connections with people, and especially a young man that reminds him of himself. Maybe there's a bit of a kind of paternal thing going on, but I don't even think he knows how much he's wanted that in his life. It's heartbreaking. And then
Mm.
I think it's he comes to then actually commit a kind of selfless act that is truly stepping outside of his comfort zone. I mean, he implodes his own life. He sacrifices himself for somebody else, which is
Mm.
huge. I mean, it's a huge thing for this guy. I don't know what's going to happen to him. It's sort of scary to think of. I don't know what's going to happen to that guy. The other two, you're a bit more aware of what's going to happen, but him, he's really sacrificed everything, you know?
Well, it's sort of a bleak thought. I'd never
But
hadn't.
no, I mean, it's not necessarily bleak because he's done something
He
extraordinary.
has done something
That's the
beautiful. Yeah,
important thing is he did
yeah,
something really extraordinary for
yeah,
somebody else, but
yeah,
I don't know what's going to happen to
yeah. Well, Adam Tanswell asks, during filming, did you get the sense that you were creating something special here? And why do you think the movie struck a chord with everyone? What's the secret to its success?
I mean, you never know. I mean, I think because it's Alexander, you sense that you're doing something special, at least for each other. And that's the important thing. I mean, you're making something that you're all in love with, and you're having a lovely time, and you hope that it gets handed over and people feel the same way about it. But so whatever the experience is, it's special with him. I mean, the two times it's special. Then it's lovely that people embrace it as much as they do. And I think there's a lot of just basic humanity in his movies. I mean, these people they're real people, and you can relate to them, and there's all of that. I think that it's a movie that's the message of connection and empathy and found family and care for each other and all of those things, all of the kind of warmth and intimacy of that of those ideas is exemplified in the movie. And I think it's a nice thing to feel in a really profound way like that. I mean, the world is nutty right now in so many ways. And to have something that's about, this simple drama of these three small people alone in this vast place, and they discover each other, is really beautiful.
It is beautiful, absolutely. Cherry in Los Angeles asked whether there was a nice Yale reunion to be had with Dave Vine. I know you weren't there at the same times, but was that a point of connection for the two of you?
It was definitely, yeah. I mean, it's a little bit of the like shared boot camp experience. I mean, it's a bit the same thing of having gone to one of those prep schools. It's a very specific thing that you understand that somebody went through. So yeah, there was that. And I think to some extent, although she had different teachers and different teaching, it's somewhat the pedagogy is somewhat the same. So I do think this may have been the school or not. She and I felt akin in the way we worked and stuff like that too. I mean, that was a person I also never had to talk to about anything, because we just sort of understood. We just knew how to work with each other. And that might be Yale. That might just be who she is and not who I am. I don't know.
Yeah. Well, Margaret Gardner for the Sunday Times in South Africa. This is sort of a question is a variant on a theme, I think. This character is so tough with a heart of gold, and many of your iconic characters are curmudgeons. In person, she says you're the opposite, which is a relief.
That's good. Yeah.
Why do you think people offer you these roles, and how delightful is it to tap into that aspect of yourself?
They're great characters to play. I mean, they're complicated, interesting characters. They're wonderful to play, and they're often funny, which is good too, and they sort of say and do the things. I suppose in a lot of ways they say and do the things I would never do. I'm not like this, thank God. I don't think I'd ever work if I was like this. Nobody would want to employ me. There's some weird way in which I don't know. It's allows me to act out on something. I don't know. It's always a question to me of, do I seek these things out unconsciously? Do I attract them? Do I just bring something to these parts that's always the same? I don't know. I do think that there's a certain, especially with lead roles, somebody sees you do something and they want to see you do it again,
Yeah.
and that's fine. That's great. I mean, they're great parts. So I got no complaints about that.
Do you find that you get to sort of exorcise some kind of like demon in the back of your mind by playing roles?
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
Probably, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, yes. I think yes, maybe unconsciously. I mean, I'm not so aware of what it is I need to get rid of, but obviously something about me needs to get some of this out of me. Yeah. And I used to have to play, and still do, a lot of rage and anger. And I'm always like, am I this angry a person at some level that I need these things to get all this rage out sometimes? And I don't know, maybe so. Because more and more in my own life, I do not feel like an angry, rageful person. So it must be doing something for me.
I was gonna say I can't remember a time I ever felt like I pissed you off, but I could be wrong about that.
It's hard to piss
Um,
me off. You can, but it's not easy to piss me off. Because the
fair.
guys I play are ready to be pissed off all the time. They sort of live in a state of like hair trigger, aggressive anger all the
Yeah,
time.
yeah, absolutely, absolutely. Lena Bass, we've got time for like one or two more questions, I think. Lena Bass from the Ukraine asks, do you consider yourself a method actor, and what is your approach to any character, and this one in particular?
I don't really consider myself a method actor. I mean, sometimes I have done more what I understand that to be. I mean, when I did the John Adams thing, that ended up almost by default being a method thing, because I was there all day, every day, in costume, saying those words. And in this weird way, I just began to sort of just be the thing all the time. And so I sort of, that was weirdly a kind of, but it's a different approach every time. I have no set way. Like Alexander said, every movie is different. Every character, the approach to it is going to be different. And sometimes it is more internal work and drawing on things that I'm familiar with and know. And sometimes it's not. Sometimes it's learning an accent, or it's learning how to do some physical thing. I played a boxing manager. I'd learned all about how to wrap the hands right and how to do all the stuff with ice and all the things to do to take care of a fighter and stuff like that, which was all very important to learn. And I guess it's sort of methody in a way, you know what I mean? It's like I needed to know that stuff. And sometimes I don't feel like that. Sometimes I feel like I want to read the kinds of books the person might read. I read a lot of mystery novels playing this guy because for some reason I was like, this guy loves, that's his porn, is mysteries. You know what I mean? It's his relaxation. It's his like secret vice is crappy mystery novels. So I was reading a lot of crappy mystery, which was fun, which was great, but there was something about it that felt right for the guy. Maybe that's methody. I don't know, you know, but I find lots of physical things help me. You know, if I find the right shoes and stuff like that, if I have the right thing on, sometimes if I have a mustache, it makes me feel different, stuff like that. You know, it's different every time. I don't know what I'm going to do every time, which is everything. I wish I had a method every time because it's harrowing and scary every time to not know exactly what I'm going to do.
What a fabulous answer. I do have to ask, just to wrap us up though, whether, you know, you might be able to share with us Paul Hunnam's and your favorite mystery novel.
Oh, wow, that's an interesting question. Um, I like there's a well, it's funny. There's a crime novel called A Coffin for Demetrios that I like by a guy named Eric Ambler. And there's another one though that I name all the time called The Three Coffins by a guy named John Dixon Carr. So I like those.
Excellent. Wonderful. We will pick them up right now.
Yeah.
Everybody, thank you so much for joining us today. And Paul, thank you for being with
Thank
us.
you.
Great to chat to you as always.
Yeah, likewise. Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.